The Yellow Vests protests have certainly not stopped. Now, they kind of died down a little bit over the holidays, and a lot of people thought this was the end of it. There were some news stories from, say, like ABC and NBC and some other big outlets where they claimed this was it. The Yellow Vests had dwindled down to only a few hundred protesters, and it was mostly gone. But sure enough, after the holidays started to go away, as we were getting away from the holidays, we started seeing a lot more action, and now probably one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. French protesters want to set up a bank run with withdrawals. This is from the Washington Post. This story is going around far and wide on all of the Bitcoin networks, because clearly the Bitcoin people are excited whenever like a financial issue pops up. But effectively, what could happen if all of these protesters, the thousands, or even thousands more who don't want to actually be on the ground and invest, go out and protest that by taking money out of the bank, then that could actually be really, really bad for France. But I want to do one thing. Before diving into the story, I want to show you this video. This is from, it says, front of the prefecture of Evreux. This guy just threw, I have no idea what that was. But this is from this morning, okay? The Yellow Vest protests are not dying down. They're continuing, they're getting worse. And a bunch of journalists I know are talking about going down because it's just getting worse. So they say, front of the prefecture of Evreux, a arrête prefectural forbidding the demonstrations of yellow waistcoats in the Eure this morning. Around 10 hours, the forces of the order charge. Very poor translation, Microsoft, but it seems like they're saying the Yellow Vest protests weren't going to be allowed. Someone came and he threw something. But let's take a look at what's going on in this bank run, because this could be serious, right? Paris. Activists from a French protest movement encouraged supporters Wednesday to set up a bank run by emptying their accounts, while the government urged citizens to express their discontent in a national debate instead of weekly demonstrations disrupting the street of Paris. Activists from the Yellow Vest movement, which started with protest over fuel tax increases, recommended the massive cash withdrawals on social media. One protester, Maxime Nicole, called it the tax collectors' referendum. "We are going to get our bread back. You're making money with our dough, and we're fed up," Nicole said in a video message. The movement's adherents said they hoped the banking action will force the French government to heed their demands, especially giving citizens the right to propose and vote on new laws. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe gave details Wednesday of a big debate the government plans to start next week in all of the regions of France. "We want it to be rich, impartial, and fruitful to be able to take it into account into the period now beginning," Philippe said. What does he mean by period now beginning? If complicated, maybe, end quote. I don't even know what they're saying. The debates will focus on four main topics: climate change, democratic issues, taxes, and public services, the Prime Minister said. Anyone can propose a local event, and an internet platform will provide another venue for discussion. President Emmanuel Macron proposed the debate as a way for the government to hear and respond to the movement's central complaints. I want to stop here, because there's a lot more other news. First, I want to mention, a bank run can be possibly one of the most serious protests that you could actually do. The way banking works for the most part is that when you put $1 into a bank, they can actually loan out more than that. Money, it's really complicated. I don't want to get into like fractional reserve banking, but for the most part, banks have to maintain a certain amount of money because they loan out more than they actually have through credit and general loans. So the money supply is expanded through the demand. But if everyone pulls their money out, then the bank can't actually back what little they already back, and thus it will effectively cause a problem for all of the banks. This is actually a pretty effective protest, and it actually spells trouble for France if they actually pull this off. But here's the thing. I actually recognize France is in a difficult position. I think this is what happens when the elites don't care about the working class. Now look, in my opinion, we do have serious problems with global warming and all these other issues. But what can you do? Like, you can't just tax the poor people and give tax cuts to the rich, because that's what France did. I'll tell you what, no matter what country you're in, no matter what government you have, if you give tax cuts to the rich and then increase taxes on the poor and the working class, expect to see flaming trash being thrown at police officers. Expect to see these mass riots. Now, Macron's talking about these debates. And honestly, I don't know what the solution is. What can France really do at this point? They've lost control. And what really scares me is the debate over who the Yellow Vests are. Are they left-wing? Are they right-wing? I don't actually know. Most people don't. You'll have people on the right claiming it's, like right-wing people. You have Trump supporters supporting Yellow Vests, but then there have been Yellow Vest protesters with sickle and hammers on their back, on their vests. I don't think this is any one particular issue. We've seen the far left and the far right protesting together. But what's worrisome, in my opinion, and you should consider this, is that if this results in a collapse of government completely, then the identitarian left could actually end up taking over. The identitarian right could actually end up taking over. And I don't know if that's, I think that's just generally bad for the most part. But let's read on, because, you know, Macron's talking about this protest, but I got another story, because Macron, he's actually heavy-handed on this, okay? So he wants to play up he's being the good guy. No, he's not. Macron also announced 10 billion euros, $11.5 billion worth of measures to boost the purchasing power of French households. Can we be a bit more specific here? What kind of measures, tax credits? All right, I'm gonna say this. I say this on a lot of stories. Washington Post. Where's your copy editor? They got misspellings and weird sentences. About 200 protesters, including trade union members and participants in the Yellow Vest movement, gathered Wednesday in Créteil, a Paris suburb, as Macron visited a handball facility dedicated to handball gymnasium. Maybe this was written by a French person. I'm not trying to be mean. Police officers used tear gas to keep the crowd at a distance from the French leader. The Yellow Vest movement was named after the fluorescent garments French motorists carry, so they are visible if they need to get out of their vehicles in a place that could be unsafe. The protests started in November to oppose fuel tax hikes and have expanded into broader public rejections of Macron's economic policies deemed to favor the rich. So this is an AP story. All right, so I'll say this. I'll give you a pass, Washington Post. It seems like the Associated Press are the ones who actually did a rather poor job here. But when you see things like this, you can tell tensions are not dying down. It's getting worse. And here's the thing. This is another story from just the other day. French Prime Minister says masks will be banned at protests amid Yellow Vest movement. Troublemakers will also be forced to pay for property damage occurring during demonstrations instead of taxpayers. So the reason I want to highlight this is that, you know, Macron can come out and say we're going to have debates and we're going to all do this nice fancy stuff, but Macron has actually been pretty... I mean, look, I don't blame him for wanting to stop the riots and the violence, but this is not a partisan fight. This is not the left versus the right. This is poor versus rich. And I think, at least in my opinion, one of the reasons you will see so often in the US and in Europe the debate from the SJWs and the anti-SJWs is because this is the real issue. And what's really frustrating to me is that you have celebrities, wealthy white Hollywood celebrities worth tens of millions of dollars, claiming that white people have more privilege over black people, and you'll see something like a tennis player, Serena Williams, talking about how, you know, people defending her saying she's marginalized, and I'm like, she's one of the richest people on the planet. You know, like, as Americans, you already are, but she's worth millions of dollars. So the issue here is they've effectively been able to stop the class debate by having race conflict, by telling, you know, you've got the alt-right and the alt-left arguing with each other, you've got people arguing about racial issues, and then what happens is the wealthy pull this kind of stuff off, right? So let's see what they say about what's going on with the Yellow Vests. France is planning to jail protesters who wear masks in the wake of weeks of violent demonstrations by the Yellow Vests movement. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said proposed legislation would target people who try to hide their identities while taking to the streets. We have to preserve the freedom to protest in France and punish those who want to violate this right, Philippe said in an interview with broadcaster TF1 on Monday night. His announcement follows weeks of anti-government protests, which were sparked by a planned hike in gas. Okay, we know that part. Masks have been confiscated by police officers at some Yellow Vest protests. The legislation would allow perpetrators to be sent to jail. At the moment, the offense is considered more minor and is punishable with a fine. Philippe said the proposed law would result in troublemakers being forced to pay property damage occurring during demonstrations instead of taxpayers. However, he offered few details about the specifics of his plan. In France, demonstrations have to be declared and authorized by municipal authorities at least 3 days before the planned date. Failing to comply with this can result in an organizer serving up to 6 months in prison and paying an $8,574 fine. The new penalties that would be proposed under Philippe's proposed legislation were not immediately clear. But can I just point out, when you have people rioting over your policies that target the working class, you really think they're going to register with you? Do you really think they're going to show up and say, hey, we're planning to riot on this day because of your policies? No. They go out and do it because this is genuine protest, not these fake nonsense protests you see typically in the United States. And look, I'm not trying to disparage protesters, right? But the issue is often you will see people show up and wave little flags and do nothing. Do absolutely nothing. Now, sometimes protests can be important for raising awareness for a certain issue. In this instance, this is conflict. This is civil conflict. That's not civil war. This is civil conflict. These people are showing up. They're destroying property. They're committing acts of violence. I don't agree for the most part with all of the destruction. But what I will say is the government is typically, they're handling it wrong. Okay? Look, honestly, I don't know how you solve these problems. Don't ask me. I'm not an expert. What I can say is there's not the way they've done it, right? France, came out at first saying, we won't back down, we refuse to negotiate. Okay, well, there you go. Look what you've done, okay? This is part of what I call the Chinese finger trap problem. They think that the problem can be solved in one way, and they ignore the actual deeper problems that cause the issue. And all they do is make it worse. You don't want to negotiate? Great. Well, you've just started this. So here's what we're going to see. We're probably going to see more violence, more destruction throughout the next coming weeks. But if this bank run actually has an impact, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a bunch of banks close down and start putting restrictions in place, because a bank run can actually be pretty devastating to the government, to France. This is bad news. So they say authorities have been able to find demonstrators who wear masks in circumstances which appear to infringe public order since 2009, according to French media reports. That has not stopped some protesters from wearing masks, and that's normal, I guess. So they say right now, the protesters appear to be united by a general discontent over the high cost of living in France and Macron's reformist agenda, and I'll tell you when this will end. When Macron resigns. And you know what? Maybe that's not true. Maybe that's not true. Maybe at this point, it's gone too far. But you know what? I'll end by saying this. The Yellow Vest protest movement is not going to be stopped until they give in. They do. And maybe they shouldn't, I don't know. But this is getting serious, and a bank run can be devastating for us. Look, these things are all tied together. So anyway, we'll see what happens this Saturday, this bank run. This is going to be interesting. Stick around, I got more videos coming up, and I'll see you in just a few minutes.